Hello, everybody. How are you? This is Mark Vines, and welcome to the Mark Vines Show. Today, we're going to talk about the events in Minneapolis and how that relates to policing in America today. You know, this has been just a troubling couple of months, several months actually. And I have to say that I'm really, like all of you, in a state of shock as to what's been happening in the country. And I hear a lot of different proposals for solutions to what's going on. And I want to talk about that mainly in response to what happened to Mr. George Floyd up in Minneapolis. I mean, that's just a horrific incident. There is no one, and I want to be clear about this, there is no one out there that is not absolutely troubled by what happened. And for those of you that are not law enforcement, or prior law enforcement or military, I'm going to tell you there's no one more troubled by what happened than those of us that are law enforcement or have been law enforcement. So you may or may not know that I am retired FBI, spent a little over 20 years in the FBI, but I was also a Washington, D.C. police officer, Metropolitan Police Department back in the mid-1990s. So I'm very familiar with the internal workings of law enforcement. I also worked in a jail for those of you that didn't know, and then I was military for 8 years prior to that. And the only reason why I point that out is because we hear a lot of talk about what should be happening right now, but we don't hear a lot of talk about what police officers think about what happened and what their solutions are. Because I'm going to say this again, there is no one in law enforcement that is not appalled by what happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis. What happened there was a crime. That was a crime. I watched the videotape just like all of you, and I'm appalled by it. That man, under no circumstances, should have died the way that he did. We all understand that. Now, what we have to talk about now is how do we prevent these things from happening in the future? Now, just like I did in the first few episodes of this show, the Mark Vine Show, talked about the culture in the FBI and the problems in the FBI, I'm going to talk about culture in police departments. Now, I'm going to give my thoughts on this, and I know there's lots of opinions on what's going on, but here's the difference. I was there, and I saw the culture, and I saw what was happening, and I was troubled by a few things well before what happened to George Floyd. And if we're going to have a serious conversation about change, we need to talk about what needs to be actually changed and get off of this whole idea that we need to defund police departments, disband police departments. That's ridiculous. Unless you want to live in a culture like what was portrayed in the movie, The Lord of the Flies, unless that's what you want in society, unless you want rampant killings and rampant just chaos, unless you want to live in a country like a third world country where the strong man survives and the drug lord is the one that reigns, or some other natural leader will come to power, because that's what will happen. There are no vacuums in nature, and what will happen is if there's no authority figure, if there's no one to keep the law, then someone else will replace that. And you're probably really not going to like what that alternative looks like. So let's just disband with this whole idea that we are not going to have a police force. That's not going to happen. Let's work with what we have and work with that. Now, I'm going to tell you that until you can put your finger on what the problem is, you're not going to fix the problem, right? It's kind of like an addiction. Until you admit that there is a problem and you can put your finger on that problem, you're never going to address the problem. And you can't beat around the bushes, right? You can't do it. Now, I'm going to give you the inside perspective on how a big city police department is. Now, let me just kind of frame this for you here for a minute. I was a police officer, like I said, in the Metropolitan Police Department, Washington, D.C. in the mid-1990s. Now, if you want to talk about a racially charged environment, a violent environment, that was it. When I was there in Washington, D.C., was we had the highest homicide rate in the world. Not the country, the world. Now, the department that I worked in was majority black, actually, officers. The neighborhood that I worked in was entirely black, and I was a white police officer working there. So I am very familiar with the community's opinion of police officers, particularly white police officers, and the idea that all white police officers are racist. I face that every day. I was subjected to, things that I'm not going to discuss here in this podcast. Guys, I've seen it. And I hear the sentiments, and I understand where people are coming from. Okay. And I saw the problems in the department. Now I'm going to start with actually an experience I had when I was in the FBI, and I was in my first field office. And at that time we had our special agent in charge had retired, had moved on. And until the director of the FBI selected a new new SAC, he brought in an acting SAC. And the guy that was brought in had spent some time at a very high level at FBI headquarters in what's known as OPR, or the Office of Professional Responsibility. So for those of you that don't know what OPR is, the only way I can term it is, we're all familiar with internal affairs in a police department. Well, OPR is the FBI's equivalent to internal affairs. So the people that investigate bad behavior by FBI employees, not just agents, but all of the employees in the FBI, and mete out discipline, to the employees that have committed actions that they engaged in activities that they should not have engaged in. Now, like many police departments, the FBI is really no different in this regard, and that is that a lot of people have a leery eye towards people that work in OPR, meaning, you're going after your own, you're going after us, you're going after other agents and employees, and, you're not one of us. You're not part of the brotherhood, the sisterhood, and you're just out to discipline us, and you're not one of us. And that was the attitude. Well, this guy, when he came in to be our SAC, he knew that we all were looking at him with kind of an askance eye, and he wanted to correct the record, if you will, and really set the tone with us to explain what OPR was all about and why it was not such a bad thing. What he explained to us was, hey, if you guys came and you sat in my chair for a while and you saw the types of cases that came to us, you'd be proud of the work that we did. There are bad people in this organization. There are people that do bad things. There are people that do things that none of you would do. And if you knew about them, you would not want to work with them. You would not want them in the organization. We are doing you a favor, because these are people that give you a bad name. These are people that shame the organization. These are people that not only harm the organization, but they harm the public. And you do not want them here. And it is our job to get rid of those people so the rest of us can present the most professional outlook to the community and do the work that we were assigned and that the American people expect us to do. Now, that always struck a chord with me, because I never really looked at it that way until he mentioned it. I was always of the belief that, we protect one another. That's the way that you're conditioned. And as time went on and my career grew longer, I saw more and more about what he was talking about, because I did see behavior that was wrong and behavior that should be dealt with. There were not everybody that worked there needed to be working there, and they really had no right to be working there. And I saw the need for an internal organization to get rid of those people. And I have to tell you, that's when I really started seeing the culture in the organization, that the people that speak out and the people that try to correct the wrongs in the organization oftentimes become the target themselves. And I personally experienced that, because in my long career, I had seen behavior that was unethical, immoral, and sometimes illegal, and reported it. And you would think that would be praiseworthy in the organization, but not always. I was subjected to retaliation, and I was subjected to people having opinions of me. You became the bad guy, in other words. But I will tell you, I'm a big boy. I can take that kind of stuff, and I know what's right, I know what's wrong, and I defend my opinions. But I will tell you that happened over time, and when I got seniority, and I got to the point to where I was able to defend myself. Now, and this is what's leading me into this discussion with what happened with George Floyd up in Minneapolis. Now, I'm going to differentiate, like I did in a past episode, a difference between the military and law enforcement. And I long ago realized that this difference between the military and law enforcement leads to some of the issues that we have today. And my thesis in today's podcast is going to be that what I'm pointing out to you is really, in my opinion, the root of the problem in law enforcement. And this is going to have to be addressed. Now, this is not an emotional discussion. This is not, this is based on my experience. It's based on facts. And if you don't agree with what I'm saying, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Maybe I can interview you for this program, or you can go on the Mark Vines Show website, or Facebook site, and we can have an intelligent discussion about this. But in order to deal with serious problems, we have to have a serious adult conversation about it. And it has to be from the framework of where people know what they're talking about and they know the internal culture. Okay? Because I'm going to start off with, I don't think that it is institutional racism. I absolutely do not. I think it is more an issue of the breakdown in the system and the culture in organizations. Because I'm going to point out that what you saw in that video with George Floyd, there was a white police officer that had his neck on George Floyd. But you also had a black police officer, you had another white police officer, and you had an Asian police officer. It was multiracial in there, right? You could tell that the other officers were very uncomfortable with what was going on. And they did not act, and they did not stop him. And then if you're a civilian and you look at the video and you think, well, why didn't they go up and just grab Derek Chauvin, the police officer that killed George Floyd, and pull him off? Well, I'll tell you why they didn't pull him off, because the culture in police departments dictates otherwise, right? Now, let me, this is where I'm going to go through and I'm going to illustrate how the military works and how police departments work and why there is an inherent flaw. I flew in the Navy. I was a helicopter pilot. And in aviation in the Navy, and I'm sure it's true of the other branches of the service as well, but I can only speak from the Navy perspective. And the way that it worked in aviation was this. Anybody in the aircraft. Now, the helicopter I flew, you had a senior person, the helicopter aircraft commander, the second pilot, the junior pilot, and then we had enlisted air crewmen in the back. So you had a variation of ranks, different ranks in the helicopter. But the Navy long ago recognized the inherent danger of flying and instituted a policy that in an aircraft, rank to a degree, within certain limitations, goes out the window. Because, you obviously have an aircraft commander, and that person's responsible for the safety of the aircraft and the air crew. But from the very first day of flight training, it is beaten into your head that everyone in that aircraft has a say in safety. And you will not be penalized for speaking up if you see something unsafe in the aircraft. You, in fact, would be rewarded for that. So if there's an unsafe practice going on in the aircraft, everybody can speak up and everybody has an equal say in the safety of the matter. We get on the ground and then we'll have a discussion about it. But in the meantime, we are all responsible for the safety, and you will not be penalized about that. It doesn't matter what your rank is. It doesn't matter how long you've been in the Navy. That's the way that it is. Also, in the military, what happens is you are to follow orders that are given to you by the people that are above you, unless those orders are illegal. Illegal. You are not required to follow orders that are given to you illegally. Now, in the United States, I believe I read somewhere, it's about 3% of all Americans have ever served in the United States military. So if it comes to law enforcement, it's going to be a much smaller number than that. Very, very few people have served under the conditions that I just described. But that's the way that it is in the military. Now, when you're talking about a police department or in the FBI, that's not emphasized the way that it is in the military. It is not beaten into your head that you are not required to follow orders that are illegal. Now, common sense would dictate that, but now let me put into the culture in a police department. The culture is this. In the police department, when you come in, you go through your academy, then you go through what's known as a field training officer period, and the length of that period depends on the agency that you're with, and they may call it different things as well, but basically it's post-graduation, on-the-job sort of training, and then you get released, and you're a rookie police officer. Now, in George Floyd's case, one of those guys, my understanding from what I've read in the reports, one of those guys was in his FTO period and was a rookie police officer, okay? And then the others that were there, with the exception of Derek Chauvin, was about 3 years or less. That's what my understanding of it. But they were much junior than him. I understand Chauvin had about 19 years on, but everybody else was significantly junior to him. Now, in the police department, when you're a rookie, you don't have an opinion. I mean, that's just the way it is. You don't have an opinion about anything. In fact, I rode with people as a rookie that didn't even want me touching the radio while I was there. That's just the way that it is. And in fact, the department that I was in, the attitude was, until you got 5 years on that department, 5 years, nobody wanted to hear what you had to say. Period. You didn't have an opinion. Now, that was my experience. And I'm going to tell you a little story here about one of my first incidents where I realized that there were things that happened in the police department that really kind of shocked me, but it happened. And I'll tell you what I was told to do about it at that time. So I came off of my FTO period, and now I'm released and I'm out patrolling on my own. And one day I do a traffic stop and I stop a person. They don't have a license. They don't have the tags are expired. They don't have insurance. They don't, all kinds. There were a number of issues with this person, and where I worked, that was an arrestable offense. So I called for backup because I knew I was patrolling by myself, and I knew that this was going to be an arrest. And I called for an officer to back me up, and somebody shows up. And while I'm in the patrol car doing the paperwork to effect this arrest, I see that the car starts pulling away and driving off. And I think that I'm going to get into a car chase. I think that this is going to be a very difficult arrest. But before I could start going after this particular individual, I could see an officer walking towards me. I mean, obviously, this officer had let this person I'm about to arrest go. And the officer walked up to the car and said, I know the guy. He's good. It's all good. Let it go. Let him go. He's good. And I thought, what do you mean? You know the guy and you let him go. And the officer says, nah, he's all right. And just walked off, and that was it. No conversation, no nothing. Well, later I was really upset about this, and I went and I talked to the guy that was my field training officer for the period of time that I was under training. And I told him that I was going to lodge a complaint against this other officer. And my field training officer said to me, you need to let it go. And I said, what do you mean let it go? I mean, I'm pissed about that. He shows, I asked him for backup. He shows up and he cuts my arrestee go. And he says, Mark, let me explain something to you. There's like two departments here. There's the good officers, and then there's people that have no business being police officers. In fact, I don't know how they got into the job that they were in, but they should not be here. And you need to be real careful about what you complain about. You don't want to be in a situation where you're in a shooting, you're in a violent altercation, and you call for backup and nobody shows up. If you push this issue, that's exactly what's going to happen. Now, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm just telling you what's going to happen. Not all the bad guys are on the street. Some of the bad guys are in here. Now, you do what you want to do, but you just remember that. And that always stuck with me. And that was my first exposure to that. Now, when you look at what happened in Minneapolis, again, based on the reports that I'm reading, based on the information that I have, Derek Chauvin appears to be one of those guys, meaning not all the bad guys are on the street. Some of the bad guys are in here in this department. And I can only imagine what I would hear if I went to the Minneapolis Police Department and went around and interviewed people, his coworkers, what they would say. I'm betting that I would hear that this guy was a known bad apple. They'd known about him for a long time, but nobody did anything about him. Why? Because he was a bully. because he was a bad guy. And if you think for a minute that it would have been an easy decision for those junior police officers to go up and physically pull Derek Chauvin off of George Floyd and not face any repercussions for what they did, that is very naive. I'm telling you, that is naive. Folks, remember, this is not television. This is not the movies. It is real life. Remember, those officers think, I got a long career ahead of me, and I got to work with this guy, and I got to work with this guy's friends. And if I take the action that I need to take, then there's going to be hell to pay. Now, keeping in mind, we know now that George Floyd died. The officers on that scene were not thinking that this guy was going to walk away dead. That's not what they were thinking. They were thinking, I got to work with this police officer, this bully. Now, again, from reports, I understand that one of the police officers, the guy that was on probation, was asking Chauvin to roll Floyd over and to allow him to breathe, but he was only saying it, but you could tell he was very, very conflicted by this. And it's really sad to watch. It really is. It really is. And this is just a horrific situation that I hope that we can do something about. But that culture of not being able to speak up, and if you do speak up, you then become the problem. That part of the culture needs to be changed. And it's not unique to Minneapolis. It is not unique to Washington, D.C. It is not unique to the FBI. It is that way across the board. It is something that I've noticed, and I've noticed for quite some time. And we need to create the culture where that officers and agents are free to speak up when they see things that are wrong, particularly things that are illegal. That is what needs to change in police departments. We do not need another cultural sensitivity block of training. There's already a lot of that goes on across the board in law enforcement. There is a lot of that that's going on. You know, you got to remember, there are just bad people. There are criminals in these organizations. And how about we deal with those people, and how about we weed them out of our organizations? But we cannot completely change everything head to toe in in police forces rather, and think that we are not going to be harming them. What you are going to do is you're basically going to have police forces that never get out of their vehicles and never proactively police. And no one wants that. I'm going to tell you right now, no one wants that. We do not want to live in a lawless society. Crimes are being committed in these riots, and that's what they are. People, innocent people, are being hurt. Property is being destroyed. People who had nothing to do with what happened to George Floyd are being punished for the actions of bad people. How about we deal with those bad people and stop punishing and blackballing and harming the people that speak up? These people should be praised. These people should be commended. And we need to stop tolerating abhorrent behavior in police departments and punish those that act, and stop punishing everybody else, the 99% of police officers that do fantastic jobs. It breaks my heart to see what is happening to some of America's finest people, and that is the people that patrol the streets of America today. It pains me to see what's happening to them. Officers have died over the last couple of weeks for no reason. Police officers are attacked for no reason. The vast majority of police officers and agents I have worked with would lay down their lives for any person out there listening to me today. And it is shameful what is happening. And it is shameful what that officer did. He is a criminal. He is not my brother. He is not someone I would want to associate with. He is not someone you would want to associate with. He is a criminal. And he needs to be punished, and he will be punished. But let's not punish everyone else that is doing what I believe to be the Lord's work every single day. So with that, guys, I appreciate you listening. Please check out the Facebook site, Mark Vine's Facebook site, and I will be talking with you soon. I'm glad that you came along, and I look forward to talking with you again. Take care. This is Mark Vines, and I'm out.